In the spring of 1900, a Greek sponge diver named Elias Stadiatis descended 45 meters into the cold Aegean Sea, and when he broke the surface again, gasping eyes wide, he told the captain he had found a heap of rotting dead men and horses on the ocean floor. He had actually found something far stranger. Resting on that seafloor, encrusted in 2,000 years of sediment, was a piece of technology so advanced, so impossibly sophisticated, that it would take the world's leading scientists over a century to understand it. And when they finally did, they had to rewrite everything they thought they knew about the ancient world. This is the story of the Antikythera Mechanism, the world's first computer, built 2,100 years ago, and then completely forgotten for 1,400 years. Nothing comparable would appear anywhere on Earth until the 14th century. Think about that for a moment. The island of Antikythera sits in a narrow, treacherous channel between mainland Greece and Crete, a place sailors have feared for 3,000 years. Strong currents, sudden storms, and beneath the surface, the bones of countless ships that never made it through. It was October of 1900, and Captain Dimitrios Kontos and his crew of sponge divers from the island of Symi were sailing south toward Tunisia, bound for the lucrative sponge beds off the North African coast. One of the most dangerous professions a man could hold in the Mediterranean world of the early 20th century. Then the storm hit. Forced to take shelter in the lee of Antikythera, the crew waited out the weather, and when the seas calmed just enough, one diver slipped beneath the waves to prospect for sponges. What Elias Stadiatis found instead was a Roman cargo ship, resting on the seafloor at a depth of nearly 50 meters, a ship that had sunk sometime around 65 BCE, and scattered across the wreck were treasures that had been sleeping in the darkness for nearly 2,000 years. Bronze and marble statues, glassware, pottery, coins, jewelry, an entire cargo, perfectly preserved by cold and darkness. The Greek government was notified immediately. The Hellenic Royal Navy dispatched a vessel. For the better part of a year, divers pulled artifacts from the wreck in one of the first major underwater archaeological operations in history. Working at lethal depths with no modern equipment, guided only by ropes and the experience of men who had spent their entire lives underwater. In 1901, most historians believe it was July, they brought up a lump. Just a corroded, unimpressive mass of calcified bronze and decayed wood, roughly the size of a thick hardcover book. Nobody paid it particular attention. It was shipped to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, with the other recovered artifacts set aside among the collection and quietly forgotten for over a year. It would take one man walking through a museum on an ordinary afternoon to notice something that would change history. In May of 1902, a Greek politician named Spiridon Stais was visiting the museum when he paused in front of that corroded lump and saw something that had escaped every scholar and archaeologist before him. A gear tooth. A single, tiny, perfectly machined bronze gear tooth, barely a millimeter long, protruding from the ancient corrosion. Stais was not a scientist, but he knew enough to understand that this was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Gears like this, precision gears, interlocking gears, were not supposed to exist in the ancient world. He alerted his cousin, Valerios Stais, the museum director, and the first formal study of what would come to be called the Antikythera Mechanism began, and it raised far more questions than it answered. The 82 surviving fragments, representing perhaps a third of the original device, were studied on and off for decades. Researchers understood it was astronomical in nature. They could see dial faces on the corroded surfaces. They could see gearing, but the full picture remained stubbornly, maddeningly out of reach. The corrosion was simply too deep. Too many of the internal components had fused together across 2,000 years of saltwater chemistry, a slow, silent entombment in bronze. In 1959, a Princeton historian of science named Derek de Sola Price took up the challenge. Using the best X-ray technology available at the time, he produced the first detailed analysis of the mechanism's internal structure. And what he saw stunned him. At minimum, 30 interlocking bronze gears, possibly as many as 37. Gears of different sizes, mounted on spindles, meshing together with extraordinary precision, some of them mounted on top of other gears, a technique called epicyclic gearing, a mechanical sophistication that engineers had not expected to see in the ancient world under any circumstances. Price's famous conclusion was short and devastating. Nothing like this exists or is known to have existed in Western technology until the 14th century. A gap of 1,400 years. Think about what that gap actually means. The Antikythera Mechanism was built around 100 BCE. The next piece of comparable clockwork machinery in Europe appeared around 1300 CE. In between those two dates, the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, the Crusades, the Black Plague, the rise and spread of Islam, the construction of the great Gothic cathedrals, the Mongol invasions. 14 centuries of human civilization. And in all that time, no one built anything that came close to what an anonymous craftsman had already accomplished before the birth of Christ. The question that kept scientists awake at night was not just how it was built, it was why. Who commissioned it? Who was it for? Why was it on that ship? And most urgently, where did the knowledge go? The true breakthrough came in 2006. A multinational team of researchers, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, drawing scientists from Britain, Greece, and the United States, applied a new generation of technology to the ancient fragments, high-resolution, three-dimensional X-ray tomography. CT scanning, essentially, the same technology used in modern hospitals, but tuned to a resolution fine enough to read text engraved in letters just over a millimeter tall. For the first time in history, researchers could see deep inside the fragments without destroying them, and what emerged, layer by layer, gear by gear, was almost incomprehensible. The front face of the mechanism displayed the position of the sun and the moon against the Greek zodiac, and drove pointers that tracked the 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, each moving across the dial in its correct celestial path. The back face was even more extraordinary. The upper dial tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year astronomical period, after which the phases of the moon repeat on exactly the same calendar days. The ancient Greeks knew of this cycle. What was breathtaking was that someone had encoded it in mechanical motion, in bronze, with enough precision to remain useful across decades of continuous operation. Below that was a smaller dial, tracking the Calippic period, a 76-year refinement of the Metonic cycle. And then there was the Saros dial. The Saros cycle is a period of exactly 223 lunar months, roughly 18 years and 11 days, after which solar and lunar eclipses repeat in the same pattern. The Antikythera Mechanism had a dedicated dial for predicting eclipses, not just recording past eclipses, predicting future ones, month by month, year by year, decades in advance. A small notch on the eclipse dial even indicated whether the eclipse would occur during the day or at night. You could turn a hand crank on this device, and it would tell you when the next solar eclipse was coming. 2,100 years ago. The 2006 team also identified something entirely unexpected: a fourth dial tracking the 4-year Olympiad cycle, the rotation of the ancient Greek athletic games, the Isthmian Games, the Pythian Games, the Nemean Games, and the original Olympic Games at Olympia. This was not purely a scientific instrument, it was also a social calendar, a way of locating a human life within both the cosmic clock of the heavens and the civic rhythm of Greek civilization. But the most staggering discovery of the 2006 study arrived not in the form of a dial, but in the form of hidden text. Embedded in the corroded surfaces of the fragments, utterly invisible to the naked eye, but revealed in exquisite detail by the CT scanner, were thousands of tiny inscribed Greek characters, instructions, a user manual. Carved into the back plate of the mechanism, in letters just over a millimeter in height, was a detailed written explanation of how the device functioned, what each dial represented, what each pointer indicated, how to read and interpret every output. Approximately 2,000 Greek characters, many of them readable for the first time in 2 millennia. And within those inscriptions, the researchers found something that hinted at a scope far beyond what the surviving fragments could account for: descriptions of planetary functions, celestial phenomena. The inscriptions described a device considerably larger and more complex than what the seafloor had preserved. The full mechanism, intact 2,000 years ago, may have been nothing less than a complete mechanical model of the solar system. The question of who built it has haunted scholarship for over a century. The ancient Greeks wrote extensively about astronomy, mathematics, and mechanical philosophy. They left no explicit description of the Antikythera Mechanism or anything resembling it. The leading theory connects the device to the island of Rhodes, specifically to the intellectual tradition shaped by the astronomer Hipparchus, who worked in Rhodes around 150 BCE, and whose precise mathematical models for the moon's irregular orbit are encoded almost exactly in the mechanism's gearing. Some researchers have proposed an even more famous name: Archimedes of Syracuse, the most celebrated mathematician and engineer of the ancient world, who reportedly constructed mechanical models of the heavens. Archimedes died in 212 BCE, a century before the ship went down. But his workshop, his knowledge, his disciples, all of those could have survived him. The ship itself was Roman, a cargo vessel almost certainly carrying looted Greek art back to Rome, most likely in the service of a wealthy Roman aristocrat, collecting the intellectual and artistic wealth of a civilization his empire had conquered. The Antikythera Mechanism may have been one of several such instruments, seized from a Greek school or private collection, being transported as an exotic luxury for the educated elite of the late Roman Republic. And then the storm came, the ship went down, and the most sophisticated piece of technology in the ancient world settled silently into the cold darkness of the Aegean, and began the long, patient work of waiting. The implications run deeper than any single artifact. If the Antikythera Mechanism could be built in 100 BCE, then the ancient Greeks were not merely culturally advanced, they were on a technological trajectory that, had it continued uninterrupted, could have led to mechanical clocks, precision instruments, and possibly the foundations of the Industrial Revolution, more than 1,000 years before it actually happened. What happened instead is a story that should make every one of us uncomfortable. Centuries of war, the systematic looting of conquered cities, the burning of great libraries, the slow grinding collapse of the Roman world. Knowledge that was not written down, or was written down in libraries that no longer exist, simply vanished. The craftsmen died, the workshops closed, the techniques were never passed on, and 14 centuries passed before the world stumbled back to a level of mechanical sophistication that someone in Rhodes or Athens had already achieved and surpassed. Today, the Antikythera Mechanism rests in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The main fragments are displayed behind glass, small, dark, unassuming pieces of corroded bronze that most visitors walk past without stopping. But those who do stop and look closely see the ghost of a technology that should not exist. Gear teeth barely a millimeter long, machined with a precision that still draws gasps from modern engineers. Dial faces inscribed with text that speaks directly across 2,000 years of silence. In 2021, researchers at University College London published a complete functional reconstruction of the mechanism. All 37 gears, all the dials, built using only techniques available to ancient Greek craftsmen. It worked. Every astronomical prediction the inscriptions described was verified by the model. The device was exactly as extraordinary as the evidence had always suggested. The Antikythera Mechanism is not an anomaly. It is not a lucky accident or a one-off curiosity. It is a warning that human civilization does not always move forward, that knowledge once lost can be lost completely, that genius can exist centuries ahead of its time and then disappear without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a corroded lump of bronze on the floor of a cold sea, waiting 2,000 years for someone to understand it. And somewhere, right now, in some museum storage room, some private collection, some unexplored stretch of ancient seabed, another artifact may be sitting in the dark, waiting. If the Antikythera Mechanism taught us anything, it's that we should never stop looking. The ancient world still has secrets it hasn't surrendered yet, and this channel exists to find them. Every video we make is another piece of a history that was nearly erased forever. If you want to be here when the next one drops, subscribe. Not because an algorithm prompted you, but because this is real history, and the real story is always more extraordinary than anything that was invented